Alright, so hey guys, welcome back to another video. Hope you guys are all doing well. Today we're going to be talking about some CPUs. We're going to be talking about Intel, some of the immense value that Intel CPUs offer right now against the current lineup of AMD Ryzen CPUs. We've got some testing, we've got some benchmarks and stuff like that we're going to be looking at just to kind of show you guys why these things are so good. And we're definitely going to be taking a look at price and all of those different things, and of course availability and everything like that. But before we get into the video, make sure that if you do enjoy it, make sure to leave a thumbs up. It really helps me out as a content creator. And if you want to see more, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We launch videos about every week, and we've got review stuff. We talk about hardware stuff a lot. We just talk about gaming hardware in general. So if you guys like that kind of content, make sure to hit that subscribe button. We're on a bunch of different platforms as well. We stream, we do a bunch of different stuff, and we have a Discord linked down below if you guys want to go and check that out. Really helpful for people who want to know more stuff about computers, or for just people who need some advice for a certain setup or something like that. All right, so now let's get into the video. So the first CPU I want to take a look at is going to be the i3-10100F. Now this is going to be one of my favorite CPUs in general, just for people who are on a lower budget. This is going to be a 4-core 8-thread CPU with some pretty decent clock speeds. We're going to be taking a look at some benchmarks and stuff like that, but we're also going to be comparing it to the Ryzen 3 3100, because these two actually should be kind of competing against each other if the market was somewhat similar. The 3100 has been in lower production volume than I really think it should have. I think it's a great value CPU for what it should have launched at, but as you guys have probably picked up, there is a fairly large price difference between these two CPUs. So the Intel CPU only costs around $115, while the Ryzen CPU cost you close to $190, which is a lot of money to what the i3-10100F offers you. And while there is a huge price difference, you would think that there is a huge performance difference, but that's not really the case. So let's take a look at this DaVinci Resolve Studio 16 benchmark. This is going to be for video editing and rendering and stuff like that. And as we can see, the Ryzen 3 3100 gets a score of 795, while the Intel Core i3 with different types of memory, so this is going to be 3200 megahertz and this was going to be 2666, with both configurations, they are pretty close to what the 3100 has. Now in general, I don't think people are going to be rendering videos on these types of CPUs, and I really don't think that's what the use case for them is. I think it's mostly just for low budget gaming and stuff like that, but I definitely think that these CPUs are pretty much within skipping distance of each other, and in terms of just the price difference, it's really big. So I definitely think that the i3 is the better buy to go for. And even when we take a look at gaming, the i3-10100 actually does better than the Ryzen 3 3100. When we just take a look at the single core performance of this particular i3, I know this is the actual F model of it, so it doesn't have the integrated GPU, but it does have the relatively same clock speeds. And what that does mean is that you still are going to have relatively higher single core performance than the Ryzen 3 3100, and that's usually going to translate into higher FPS. So again, that's win number one for Intel. Now we're going to move on to the Intel Core i3-11400F. This is a fairly recent CPU, so I don't have a whole lot of numbers to back this thing, just because in terms of the CPU that I'm going to be comparing it against, there's not a whole lot of direct comparisons between these two CPUs or models like it, but I'm going to try my hardest to kind of talk about the differences and the reasons to why you should actually buy this i5-11400F. Now again, the F at the end of this name does mean that you aren't going to get any integrated graphics as well as no overclocking, but again, I really don't think a lot of people are going to be looking for that, just considering that the performance out of the box for this particular CPU is just so great compared to what the Ryzen 5 3600 is. Now just a quick little rundown, this thing does have 6 cores, 12 threads, just like the Ryzen 5 3600 does, but this thing is about $40 cheaper. The CPU has the same number of cores and threads, but much faster single core performance and overall IPC improvements. It also has a higher boost clock, and therefore it's probably going to have better single core and multi-core performance. Now again, like I said, I don't have any direct benchmarks, but I am going to be linking some videos from some pretty well-known YouTubers out there. One of them is going to be Hardware Unboxed, that is basically just talking about this i5-11400F and just why it's such a great overall CPU for people to buy right now. So now we're going to move on to the i7. So the i7-10700KF, which is one of my favorite CPUs to be out there, is such a great value CPU. It is overclockable because it does have the K at the end, but it does not have an integrated GPU, so which I don't think is going to be a big deal, because most people who are going to be rocking an i7 are going to be using it for a gaming machine, and they are also going to have a dedicated graphics card. But yeah, I definitely think that this CPU is amazing. It has a boost clock up to 5.1 gigahertz, and if you overclock it, which this thing is able to, I'm pretty sure you could probably hit 5 gigahertz on this thing pretty easily. Now again, the one big thing that you have to look at when we're taking a look at these Intel CPUs is just the price for them. This is a $300 CPU, And when we take a look at the next step up for AMD, this is only a 3700X, which is a CPU that I have. I really like it, but really this CPU is way better value than this CPU right now. Again, this still has the same 8 cores and 16 threads, but the IPC on these Ryzen 7 3700Xs, which is the amount of things they could do per clock, is so much lower than what these i7 10700s can do. And as well, the single core performance on this thing is much worse than what this thing can do. And here's some benchmarks to kind of show you guys. So when it comes to the actual gaming performance, this thing absolutely demolishes what the 3700X can do. Now again, this is just one game, so depending on what game that you are playing, you're going to have differences in the actual delta between these FPS numbers that these two CPUs get. But really, when it comes down to it, this CPU, the 10700K or the 10700KF, is going to score much better than the 3700 when it comes to gaming applications. And when it comes to an actual Cinebench run where Ryzen is usually better in a multi-core scenario, the i7 10700K actually does better than the 3700X. And again, all of this is while the 3700X is $30 more expensive than the i7 10700KF. Now we're going to move on to our final part. This is going to be the high end of the Intel CPUs. So this is the i9 10850K. So this is pretty similar to the 10900K, though it is going to have lower boost clocks. That's really the only difference between this thing. It is only going to have a 5.2 boost clock compared to a 5.3, which is what the 900K had. But again, that's only a boost clock. That doesn't mean it's actually going to sustain that clock speed for a long time. That's mainly just a single core that's able to get up to that particular clock speed. Now, this thing does have 10 cores and 20 threads, which is an absolute powerhouse of a CPU. And we're going to be comparing it against the only thing that's somewhat in its price range and kind of in its performance class is the Ryzen 7 5800X. So this is the newest 8-core CPU from AMD. And again, this is only 8 cores compared to the Intel's 10 cores. And again, as you guys have probably seen, this thing only costs $380, while this thing costs $450. That is a pretty huge price difference when we're considering that this thing has 2 less cores than this CPU, and it might have higher single core performance, which we will kind of look at here. But again, this CPU is just an absolute banger for the money. Now again, when we take a look at it, the single thread performance of the 5800X is going to absolutely demolish the 10900K, and that's perfectly fine. I think a lot of people will kind of expect that since these new CPUs from AMD are just so crazy good when it comes to single core performance. I definitely think that if you just want the best overall gaming experience, the 5800X is great to go for. But if you want the best all-around experience, if you're doing like video editing, stuff like that, this CPU is going to be amazing. So let's take a look at this V-Ray benchmark. So the 10900K actually scores better than the 5800X, and it's mostly to do with the extra 2 cores that the 10900K has over the 5800X. And again, with all those things considered, these two CPUs have a pretty massive price difference. This is $380 versus $450. That's a huge price difference. And overall, I would really recommend this Core i9 10850K compared to what AMD is offering at this particular price point. So that's about really all I have to say for this video. I think Intel is kind of getting back to the point where they know that they need to be competitive, and they are lowering prices, which is great for all of us who are in the consumer base and are looking to buy a brand new CPU. I think that AMD has some really good stuff out there, but right now their prices are pretty high compared to what Intel is selling, and I think Intel CPUs are some pretty good value compared to what AMD is offering. All right, so thank you guys for watching the video. If you guys have any thoughts, opinions, or you guys just want to talk about your CPUs, make sure to go down in the comment section below. As well, if you guys ended up enjoying the video, make sure to leave a like, really helps me out. And if you guys want to see more, hit the subscribe button. Again, thanks for taking the time out of your day to come in and watch one of my videos. It really means a lot to me, and I hope to see you guys in the next one. Peace.